Okay, guys, so bit of a different video today. It's not really going to be a video. It's going to be more of a audiobook. It is an audiobook. So a little backstory. I remember I was probably, I don't know, 12, 10, 12 or something. And I remember seeing this kind of movie on Animal Planet. Back when Animal Planet was, good, not just whatever it's turned into now. It's not half as good as it used to be. But anyway, I remember it, and it was dealing with this game warden in California, and it was like all these crazy stories. And I remember seeing it maybe 4 times. Anytime it came on, I watched it. I loved it. And yeah, I could never find it again. I can never find it online, or I can't find a video anywhere. I don't know. Maybe I haven't tried to pirate it or something. I don't know. But anyway, I found out it was based off a book, Wildlife Wars. I'll probably put a picture of it right here. Um, yeah, a book called Wildlife Wars by a guy named Terry Grotz or something like that. I can't pronounce it right, but yeah, that movie was based off of that book. And once I found it, I looked around and I found the free book, audiobook. Somebody read it on YouTube. And I don't think it's the entire thing or it's all the stuff, because there's stuff that he did in the movie that wasn't in the book. But anyway, I found the book. Somebody posted it for free. I think you get on Audible too. You can still buy the book on Amazon. So if you prefer to read, you can go there. I think it's like 10, $15, long book. But yeah, so anyway, I found the audiobook for free. I downloaded it through mystical means of technology. And there's one story in it in particular that I don't know how to describe it. It's a very interesting story. And I don't know if this is 100% true. I don't know if this is, fiction. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction, as a lot of people say. But I think it's a very cool story, and I don't think this book has gotten enough attention for what it is. So, I want to put this clip up after this little deal. I'm going to put this clip up, and it's right at 26, 28 minutes. So if you're driving or you're in the shop or something, just put it on, put your speakers on, put your headphones in. It's a very interesting story. Very interesting story. So, I want to just give this clip. Hopefully I don't get a copyright strike. And yeah, so we're finna go with chapter 19, Crazy Joe of Wildlife Wars by Terry Grunt. So hope you guys enjoy it, and yeah.
19. Crazy Joe and the Drag. After my transfer to Colusa County, I spent many hours learning about the Sacramento Valley, its people, its wildlife populations, and its hunting subculture, especially as it related to illegal commercial wildlife harvesting activity. One of my major problems in the Sacramento Valley at that time was trying to slow down the illegal commercial market hunting of waterfowl. This activity consisted of hunters going at night into the rice fields where the waterfowl, primarily ducks, were feeding, sneaking up on them and shooting them on the ground as they fed in tightly packed masses, sometimes as many as 50,000 feeding in a bunch. The hunters would then either haul the carcasses out or have their buyers go to the kill site the next day, taking all the risks, of course, and haul them from the fields themselves. These rice-fed wild ducks would then end up in the commercial markets of some major West Coast city, or be shipped to commercial markets as far away as New York, via rail or truck. Many old-timers used to tell me that the tried-and-true method was to ambush the feeding ducks from behind a rice check as the ducks, in a compact mass, fed up to your place of concealment. They would use shotguns with homemade magazine extenders that increased the shell capacity from 5 to 15. With that kind of firepower, they would kill from 300 to 1,000 or more birds, depending on the number of shooters. After the chute had been pulled, the shooters would either lie down and look to see if the game wardens were coming, or run like hell and come back later to pick up their ducks after the area had cooled off. In such a situation, there were always many crippled ducks, probably twice as many as the dead ones. The market hunter would move out among the carpet of dead and dying ducks, picking them up and placing them by twos between his fingers, until he had 8 in his hand. Any birds still alive and struggling would be bitten across the head, thereby crushing their skulls. Once the hunter had 8 to 10 birds in hand, he would hurriedly wrap a piece of butcher twine around the necks below the heads and above his fingers, cinch it tightly, and then drop the bundle to the ground. When all the birds that could be picked had been gathered, sometimes a rope would be tied to all of the bundles and the ducks would be dragged out of the field like some long daisy chain. This is how the term drag came into play when one talked about a duck shoot by commercial market hunters in the Sacramento Valley, according to some of the old-timers I met over the years. To drag the ducks meant to slaughter them on the ground at night as they fed, killing large numbers for the market or one's own freezer. Those in the business of killing large quantities of ducks for either the market or their personal consumption were called draggers. On one of my days off during the fall, I decided I had better spend some time getting my house ready for the winter storms that would soon appear. As I worked around the yard winterizing my sprinkler system, up drove an old beat-up pickup. The driver just sat there in the cab in front of my home and watched me work on the sprinklers. I thought that behavior somewhat odd, but I couldn't leave what I was working on just yet, so I continued with my task. When I finished what I was doing, I got up out of the mud that had water pipe going in every direction and walked over to greet the unknown driver and see who he was and what he wanted. Approaching the vehicle, I saw that the driver was not anyone I knew, so I said, "Good morning, may I help you?" He said, "No. I just wanted to see what the dumbest son of a bitch in the valley looked like." Somewhat taken aback by this very old man's boldness, I said, "Well, that is a matter of opinion." "No, that is an accurate statement," he responded. "I have watched you bumble along in the rice fields at night, and you are walking right by too many draggers. Because of your inability to catch them, or really understand what the ins and outs of the killing profession are, they're getting bolder." He continued, "To be frank, they are my competition, and I need them out of the way. Since I have this problem and you really aren't part of the solution as yet, I have a proposition for you." What he had said was pretty much on the money. I hadn't been able to get to the draggers in any way as yet because of my inexperience and my inability to get anyone in the valley to trust the new game warden and come forward with information on how to work these tight-knit groups of duck-killing sons of guns. In fact, my level of frustration was so high that at that time I would have teamed up with the devil if it meant some of these lads killing the ducks at night would fall into my pretty much empty hands. Something inside me told me this chap might be the ticket. To me, the eyes tell it all, and in this chap's case, they did. His eyes were cold, calculating, intelligent, and a little bit crazy. Well, I thought, what have you got to lose, Terry? You still know right from wrong, so let's give it a whirl. You can always get off when you want. Little did I know that the rush I gained from this man in the form of knowledge would remain in my system until I retired some 30 years or so later. "What is your offer?" I asked cautiously, yet curiously. "I'll tell you what," he answered. "I will teach you how to catch the draggers in the valley. If you pay attention to what I tell you, then maybe the fields won't be so cluttered by my competition. I am just getting too old to run with the younger men who are truly not worthy of this profession, and you could be of assistance to me, as I see it. Why don't you just quit if it's getting too hard for you? It's not like it's legal and all," I said. The look he gave me told me not to go there. That was not an intelligent question as far as he was concerned. The look in his light blue eyes told it all. This was something he had been doing for the better part of 60 years. When one is into the hunt for that long a time, it becomes a way of life. "Sorry," I said. The apology seemed to satisfy him. I looked at him for a few more moments and then said, "What about you? Where do you fit in this picture if I catch you doing the same thing you want me to prevent others from doing?" He gave me a funny look, and his blue eyes snapped as he said, "You won't. If you are fortunate enough to catch me, then I will pay up just like a slot machine, no problem. But don't worry, that won't be an option you will have to live with." Ignoring what he said and the way he said it because I had aspirations of my own regarding this chap, as well as all the others, I said, "Well, that sounds pretty good to me. I'm always willing to learn." I stuck out my hand and added, "My name is Terry Gross. You got a deal." Refusing my hand, he answered, "I know who you are. You just call me Joe, and I will call you when I am ready." With that, he started up his clunker red Ford pickup and drove off, leaving me to memorize his license plate number. Brother, I thought. Getting to know Colusa County and its people was going to be quite a challenge. Never in my wildest dreams did I think anyone in this county would step forward to help the game warden. Until then, hardly a single person had even offered a hand in friendship. Other than the Colusa County Sheriff's officers, who were most helpful, the others in the county politely turned their backs on Fish and Game folks, for the most part. People in Colusa County had a reputation of doing what they wanted and when, and they figured that tradition was just fine, and would continue if they had anything to do with it. In addition, some of my Fish and Game predecessors had not really carried the cause too well in the eyes of the folks we were supposed to be serving. However, there was still the issue of the law of the land, and I was bound and determined to make the county safe for natural resources, as well as preserving those resources for people yet to come. Boy, what a mouthful I had taken, without yet knowing it. My mind ran back to the meeting I had just had with Joe. Here it was, a nest on the ground if this chap came through. Going into the house, I called the sheriff's office and asked them to run Joe's license plate, so I could find out who my friend really was. The plate came back registered to a local farming corporation, so I was no further ahead on this chap than before. However, I still had my friend Tom, who knew everyone in the valley, or so it seemed, so I made a call to him. Tom told me the fellow I had met, based on my description, was a very bad man and crazy to boot. Tom suggested that I be very careful around him, because he would just as soon shoot me as look at me. Tom also informed me that this chap came from a family that had been in the valley for years, and that had killed and sold to the San Francisco markets a lot of ducks. There was a long silence on the phone, and then Tom added, "Mr. Gross, if he wants to help you learn how to catch draggers, there is none better." Thanking Tom, I hung up and wondered what the hell I was letting myself in for. I later found out more about my mystery friend by nosing around and, as a result, added a little bit more to my knowledge of him. Let's just call him Crazy Joe. He was an old man, probably in his middle to late 60s, of medium height and build, dark-complected, with the bluest eyes that spoke of a violence barely kept under the surface. He had a hair-trigger temper and was prone to shoot at anyone who crossed onto his small farm or the property of his employer. There were even those who claimed to have crossed into his hunting territory and had to lie in a rice ditch all day as a result of Joe's prowess with a rifle, keeping them there. What a pair we would make, I thought, the law and the lawless. I had made up my mind a long time ago that I would take the outlaws out any way I could, just as long as it was legal. Now, with Joe as my partner, the possibility of payback loomed large, and a whole lot nearer than any time before. The thought of finally being able to run some of these duck-killing chaps to the ground gave me a damn good feeling, to say the least. I always worked hard, but many times I had to work harder just to offset my lack of knowledge. If I could work hard the way my body allowed, and for once really know what I was doing, the critters might just have a chance, I thought. A large grin was starting to spread over my tired face, one of those "God really does love game wardens" types of grin. For 2 weeks, nothing happened, and I began to feel that Crazy Joe wasn't going to work out. If he really had a desire to slow down his competition, surely he would have called me by now, I thought. Then one evening, as a light, misty rain was falling, my phone rang. I had just sat down to a hurried supper so I could get back into the field when Donna said, "Joe is on the phone." I picked up the phone and heard a voice say, "Let's go." "Where?" I asked. He described a duck club north of Gunner's Field in the Lambertville complex. "I know where it is, but how do I find you in that maze?" I asked. "I will find you. See you shortly." Then the voice was gone. Leaving the dinner table, I headed into my bedroom, grabbed a clean shirt, pinned on my badge, and headed for the door. As I went out, Donna knowingly handed me a thick meat sandwich. She had overheard part of the telephone conversation, realized I was on the run again, and swung into action. She was uncanny, and that is why one of her nicknames was Radar, after the character in the MASH television series. Giving her a quick kiss for taking care of me the way she always did, I headed out the door into the evening's rainy mist. Pulling into a bamboo thicket where Joe had asked me to meet him, I was relieved to see him come out of the brush with nothing in his hands but a flashlight. At that point, I still wasn't sure who I'd coupled up with and whether he could be trusted. "Evening, Joe," I said. He just gave me a hard look and said, "Get going south on 4 Mile Road. There's something down there I want to show you." From that rainy evening start, we worked together throughout that first winter, 2 odd ducks equally determined to achieve our goals. One of my goals, on a personal note, centered around Joe's left forearm. All across the bottom portion of that arm were terrible burn scars. After we had worked together for several weeks, and I had gotten to know my stern taskmaster better, I found the courage to ask about the scars. He looked at me as if to say, "What a dummy." and then pointed to the shotgun he now always carried when we worked together. He said the old Remington Model 11 shotgun was responsible for those burns. He called it old meat in the pot. He said that when the market hunters put the extenders on their shotguns, which increased the shell capacity from 3 or 5 to sometimes as many as 15, they started burning their arms. He was quiet for a moment and then continued, explaining that when they went into the fields to blow up the ducks, they loaded their shotguns to their maximum shell capacities. As they began to shoot rapidly into the massed bunches of feeding ducks, the shotgun rose from the recoil of rapid repeated firings. The only way to hold the gun down, so they could continue to deliver their shot strings into the densest part of the flock, was to throw their left forearms over the barrels and push them down. This worked fine until one approached shot number 9 or 10. By that time, the barrel was very hot, and leaving the arm over the barrel after that point would lead to burns. In the Sacramento Valley, repeated burns on the arms of many old-timers were considered their badge of courage. Conversely, apprehension of commercial market hunters by the game warden was the warden's badge of courage, and a stain most hunters fought hard to keep from their kilts. Joe was a stern but good teacher. I guess desperation on my part to slow down the terrible carnage in the rice fields after dark made me a good student. He taught me how to read subtle signs left along the dirt roads after a drag. He taught me the details of duck behavior, how to read the weather, and how to read the ducks in conjunction with particular weather patterns. He taught me the factors that would lead to a duck slaughter, when to expect it, how to intercept those involved, and what parts of the valley the ducks favored during different times of the year. He taught me market hunter terminology, where existing markets were located, names of buyers, shooters, and middlemen, favored methods of transport by the various clans in the valley, and the names of those storing ducks for mass pickups and where. He gave me personal insights into those I was hunting and told me how to be prepared for ambushes. Basically, he gave me an opportunity to look into the past with a set of eyes from the present. He also, not through words but through actions, allowed me access to himself. A hunter of humans does not really draw a line of distinction. A target is a target, and Joe was looming larger than life, something we both realized early in the relationship. After one winter season of meeting clandestinely so people wouldn't know Joe was cooperating with the law, the training ended. He had taught me the commercial market hunter's trade. How well, only time would tell. Joe met me at our usual meeting place one evening and said, "We're through with the lessons. You have a handle on what needs to be done, and I suggest you get cracking." About that time, a small flock of graceful pintail went over en route to their chosen field for the evening, and as Joe followed their route, his eyes and voice softened. "Terry," he said, "people are changing. The ducks are declining, and the history that was once mine is just that. I am getting too old to commercial market hunt like I did when I was a young man 50 years ago." There was a long pause before he spoke again, and I did not intrude. "Once a year from now on, I will drag enough ducks to fill my freezer for a year and keep me young. I will call you and let you know when I am going. If you catch me, fine. If you don't, that's your problem." With that, and a wave of the hand, off he went, basically out of my life because of who we were and what we each represented. Sitting there watching him drive off, I wondered. If he was getting too old to hunt commercially anymore, then why had he taught me the tricks of the trade? I began to get an unusual feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. Was I being set up, or was he setting himself up? I didn't have a sense of the answer, but figured I would know when it came. The following winter during duck season, I received a call from Crazy Joe. He said, "I think I will be going out this evening. Good luck." He hung up before I could ask him a single question. Minutes later, out I went into the night. I was going out anyway, because the time, ducks, and cycle of the moon were right for the draggers to do their thing. So Joe's call did nothing more than get me another sandwich for dinner as I left my home. Using his teaching and what I'd learned since then, I picked an area that suited a commercial shoot, hid my vehicle, walked into the area, and dug in for the evening's events. The area was one just loaded with bunches of ducks, mostly pintail, and all were hungrily feeding. I figured if anyone had any bad intentions, this is where they would expend those energies. About 2 a.m, my hunch proved correct. Lying against my rice check, I saw 3 men walk right by me, heading in a crouched position toward my bunch of feeding ducks. They moved right up to my check, just a few feet north of where I lay, and then went to earth and commenced to crawl the rest of the distance, about 40 yards toward my feeding ducks. Rolling over on my right shoulder so I could mark their progress better, I thought with a grin, "Well, lads, At least one of you will be mine tonight." Then a rattle of shots from the northeast shook the morning stillness, spooking the ducks feeding in my field. Up they went with a roar before the lads sneaking toward them could get a shot, and back to the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge immediately to the east they scampered. Damn, I thought. Come on, God, give me a break here. I could hear the soft roar of fleeing waterfowl from the chute to the northeast. I counted about 10 rapid-fire shots that ripped the morning quiet like the noise of a tearing sheet. I was too far away from that action to do any good, and just lay there clenching my fists and teeth in frustration. Just too far away for me to catch that chap, I thought. Only one gun doing the shooting, but just too far. I knew from past experience and from Joe's teachings that if I wasn't within 40 yards or less of the shooters, I could kiss off any hope of fruitful action on my part. The shooters would just melt away into the night. A combination of shadows, knowledge of the area, and luck would allow them to escape as the ducks lay flopping and dying on the ground. Damn. 2 opportunities, and I was not in the right place to be effective for either one. At that time, the 3 lads who had been sneaking up on the ducks I had been watching walked by, heading back in the direction from which they had come. I recognized one of them by his shape and voice and said to myself, "Someday, Maxwell, you will not be so lucky. I don't care if your wife and mine are good buddies. Someday. I waited until daylight on my rice check and then moved northeast, using my knowledge of the area to find the kill site. Talk about frustrated. The kill site was on the north end of Delavan National Wildlife Refuge. A goddamned national wildlife refuge. That took the work of a master. Then the wheels began to turn. I had worked with the master. Surely he wouldn't shoot the refuge, but then again. About 3 days later, Joe called and said, "Where were you?" I told him I'd been several miles from where I actually had been to see if that might draw a comment about where I should have been. He said, "Well, I don't shoot that area. Better luck next year." You could almost hear the relief in his voice. He said, "See you next year," and hung up. That call provided an answer to my instincts about who might be my master shooter on the National Wildlife Refuge. I had heard no other shooting that evening for miles around, so it must have been him. But then again, was it? The following year, just about the same time as the year before, Joe called and said, "It's a good night. I think I will be out and about." In a teasing voice, I said, "Where are you going this time?" He said, "Good luck," and hung up the phone. This time, the birds were feeding over toward the west side of the valley, from Link Dennis's property all the way across the interstate. As I slowly moved through the dark, thick night on farm roads, I tried to echolocate every bunch of ducks I could in order to make my choice for the night's activities. My selection had to be a good one this time, or I would be rewarded again with dead and crippled ducks. I finally decided to sit to the east of the main flocks of ducks strung out across the valley, and just south of a large bunch happily feeding on the north end of Delavan National Wildlife Refuge, Link Dennis's property, and the Newhall Farms property. About 2 a.m., somebody blew up the ducks immediately north of my stakeout location on what appeared to be the National Wildlife Refuge. Again, I was hidden just too far away to try to intercept the shooter. Damn it anyway, that was twice the same thing had happened to me. I sat there in my hiding place just off the south end of the refuge, as many of the ducks nearest to me took to the air in alarm, trying to figure out how to work this problem more successfully in the future. About an hour passed as I sat there in frustration, and suddenly I noticed that bunches of dead pintail ducks were floating past me in the canal that bordered the west side of the refuge. That canal ran under the Maxwell Highway and stopped at a small dam on private property. I watched in utter amazement as the bunches of pintail floated down the canal and under the highway and lodged gently against the headboards of the small irrigation dam. Looking back up the canal through my starlight scope, I could see more dead ducks coming down in what appeared to be an endless stream. Then it dawned on me. Whoever had shot the ducks on the refuge earlier that morning had tossed them into the canal for 2 reasons. First, it relieved him of the need to pack them any distance, and second, it relieved him of any evidence that might be held against him if he were stopped on his way out of the rice fields. Only an old master in the commercial market hunting arena would think of such a plan. It was now apparent that the shooter had planned this raid very carefully and would be along shortly to pick up his birds, carry them a short distance to the road, throw them into a waiting pickup, and be gone. The idea was as slick as cow slobbers, with one exception: the student in the ointment. I hurriedly hid right next to the check dam, using a thick patch of tule as my cover. Sitting down, I could look right at the headboard area of the dam and plainly see the bunches of ducks stacking up. I sat there quietly waiting. By 3:30 a.m., I estimated that at least 300 ducks had quietly floated down the canal and lodged against the check dam, with more still coming. Then I heard someone coming from behind me. I froze so as not to alert the person approaching and intently waited. Pretty soon, the unmistakable shape of a man emerged from the darkness, examined the area around the check dam, and then walked over to its edge and began to stuff bunches of ducks into a gunny sack. I let him collect about 3 bunches of ducks and then quickly stood up and stepped out from my hiding place. I said, "Good morning, State Fish and Game Warden. You are under arrest." Without showing any surprise or emotion, as if he had expected me to be there, the man kept stuffing ducks into the sack, and when he had filled it, moved it off to one side. He then picked up another empty gunny sack lying by his feet and, in the unmistakable voice of Crazy Joe, said, "Terry, give me a hand with the rest of these, please." I had caught my teacher, one of the best draggers in the country. I was speechless. Without a word, I dropped down by his side like an old friend and helped him load that gunny sack and others with dead ducks. Without any conversation, we finished cleaning up the ducks around the dam. Walking over to my hidden patrol truck, I started the engine and drove it back to the check dam. Joe and I loaded 8 sacks of dead ducks into the back of the truck, still without a word passing between us. When we finished loading our cargo, we got into the truck and drove in silence north along the canal bordering the refuge on the west, picking up the bunches of ducks that had hung up in the overhanging bushes as they floated down toward the dam. After completing that task, I turned to Joe and said, "Where's the kill site?" He pointed toward a field to the northwest, about 50 yards from the canal. By now, daylight was showing in the east. The dawn of another day for all of us, except the ducks in the bags and those dotting the field in front of us. The ducks in the field numbered another 73, which were picked up by 2 rapidly tiring friends. When we got back to my truck, I said, "Joe, I'm going to have to cite you for all of this." Looking me dead in the eye, he said, "I know." I said, "Well, I don't believe in that without a full stomach. How about you?" Joe grinned and answered, "Let's go. I could go for some of that food I hear you cook." With that, the game warden and the outlaw drove to the game warden's house and, side by side in the kitchen, cooked up spuds, steak, and eggs topped off with some of my wife's homemade bread, which, by the way, is the world's best, coffee for Joe, and milk for me. After breakfast, I sat down at the kitchen table with my citation book and issued citations to Joe for a monster overlimit, taking migratory waterfowl before legal shooting hours, wanton waste, and use of an unplugged shotgun. Joe accepted the tickets without a word, and then asked for a lift home, which I was happy to give him. When I got back home, I gutted all the ducks and placed them in my evidence freezer, located on Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, for use in court. However, there was no need for courtroom preparation. Joe paid $500 per charge, or $2,000 total, and as far as I was concerned, he was square with the government and me. Several days later, I saw Joe in the field and told him, no offense, I had just done what I was trained to do. He said, "I didn't expect anything less of you. If you had done anything less than what you did, I would have been terribly disappointed in my student. However, I want you to understand that my days as a dragger ended when you apprehended me at the check dam. The days are gone when one can kill large numbers of birds and expect large numbers of them to return the following year. I have watched the demise of our waterfowl and am partly responsible. As self-imposed punishment, I will never again hunt ducks the rest of my life." The look in his eyes confirmed what he had just said. I could see something else in those eyes as well. It was like seeing a tremendous loss of personal history, almost as if a flame had gone out. I said, "Joe, that isn't necessary. You can hunt the rest of the days of your life. Just stay within the limits." He looked at me with those hard blue eyes and said, "Terry, I don't go back on my word. The ducks need a reprieve. I, for one, have taken more than my share, and now, seeing what that has caused, will hunt no more. Seeing all the cripples the other morning just brought that point home. And that is it. No more." There was a real finality in the way Joe spoke, a passing of an era. A bloody era, but historical as well. Until his dying day, I never knew Joe to take a shotgun into the field to smell the curing hay from the rows of rice straw left by the combines, to hear the whir of wings overhead, to feel the tule fog on his face or the dampness in his feet as he crawled up on the ducks. He flat out simply stayed home. He was an unusual man from a unique time in history. He was also a man who was smart enough to take the knowledge gained from that history and pass it on. To this day, I still use some of the tricks of the trade that Crazy Joe taught me. I grew up a lot in those formative years, but that night at the check dam, I learned to read history and perhaps become part of it myself. Joe is dead now, and the personal diary he kept from age 11 until that fateful day on the canal, listing all the ducks he had killed and sold over 50 years, was tossed into the trash by his unknowing daughter after his death. With it went a piece of history. I went on to catch 16 draggers in the valley over the time I remained there carrying a badge. All but 5 were locals, and all were very surprised that I was there when they pulled the trigger. Thank you, Joe.